I often hear people say that the older cases were put together better than the newer ones. They'll always say they don't make them like they used to. The vintage knives are put together better. And today I've got 4 vintage knives here. This one's from 1940 to 1964. This one's from 1965 to 1969. This is a 1970, and this is a 1976. So I think all these classify as the older vintage knives, classic knives. And we're going to look these over in the same way that we would look over a modern case that we'd buy. Little things that we normally point out. Is there any gapping? Is there any gaps between the back spring and the liner? How is the fit and finish? Are the transitions smooth? Are the pins proud? Is there any stepping on the back spring? How is the blade centering? Is the blade straight down the middle, or is it leaning toward the pile side or the show side? Blade wobble. Is there any blade wobble? And lastly, the Tang stamp. How clear is the Tang stamp? Those are some of the things we're going to look at with these older knives here. First one here is this 47 pattern Stockman. You can see the Tang stamp there. But let's look at these in regard to gaps first. If you look at that back spring there, just ignore this damage here. That was not like that when it was new. At least I sure hope it wasn't. That was put on there sometime in the past many years. Nevertheless, there's a gap right there between the main spring and the liner. Gaps like that don't bother me. You know that if you've watched any of my videos, that doesn't bother me at all. I'm just simply pointing out that the older ones had them too. What about this knife? Yeah, look at this gap. See it going right down there by that spring? Goes almost the whole length of the knife in the liner. Now this knife is still good and tight. It's tight as it can be. This knife has not loosened up. That gap was there when this knife was made. You can also, you can see the Tang stamp right here on this one. There you go. This is an 88 pattern Congress. It's a cool knife, but it does have some gapping in the back spring. What about this one? Yep, see it right there? There's a gap, goes all the way down that liner there by that spring. You can see light right through it. Again, that doesn't bother me. This is a beautiful knife. It does not affect the usability at all. If I counted those dots right, it's a 1970. If not, it's a 1971. There's a lot of little bitty dots right there, but I believe it's a 1970. That right there is in a 32 pattern. And then lastly, we got this Sodbuster here. Sodbuster Jr. Here you can see the stamp. If I counted that right, that one don't have as many dots. That's a 1976. Does this one have any gaps? Nope, I don't believe it does. So, that one right there doesn't have any gaps. Well, the next thing we move on to is blade centering. Now, because of these particular knives I have out there, I'm not going to count this Congress or this Stockman in regard to blade centering, because both of these knives have so many blades crammed into such a small area. Blade centering really isn't going to come into play. You can see how they're crammed in there. So I am not going to count those two because of the style of knives that they are. Their blades are touching on both of these knives, and if you went out and bought those two knives new from case, they would be touching again. So I'm not going to count them, but we will look at these two. How is the blade centering? What about this one? Oh, that main blade is off toward the pile side. When you open it, it's going to push that into the liner. That's not good. But that's how it's put together. And that right there is a 1970. What about the pin blade? The pin blade again is leaning toward the show side. So when you grab it, it's more inclined to push it into the liner right there. So, how is sintering on this knife? Beautiful knife, but the sintering isn't any better than a modern case. Let me raise the camera there just a little bit. Okay, well, what about this 1976 Sodbuster? We already saw that it didn't have any gaps on the back spring. Maybe the blade sintering's good too. What do y'all think? No, that's not good blade sintering at all. Again, it's not hurting the knife. It's not affecting the use of this knife. This knife's been used for many, many years. It works just fine. Point being, you had the same things happen with the older case knives that you find happening with the newer knives. Blade wobble. Okay, we're going to put a disclaimer on blade wobble. These knives that I've got here have all been used. And because they have all been used, they could have either tightened up with time, as happens sometimes with blade wobble, or they could have loosened up over time, developing blade wobble. We'll suffice it to say that the ones that I have seen that are in like new condition and have not been used much, or if any at all, could be either or. Some of them have a good tight blade, some of them have a looser blade. And from my personal experience, yours may differ now, but my personal experience, it's about identical. You had blade wobble about the same amount back then as a modern case knife does today. That leads us to the next one, fit and finish. This one does not have good fit and finish at all. Now, it's a stag knife, so that's understandable. Stag knives are normally a little rougher, but you can feel every pin. You can feel the shield, of course. You can just plumb catch your fingernail on the bolster, on any bolster, in any position. It's not smoothed off at all. The back here, you can feel the liners with your finger. It's not finished off near as much as they do a normal case. And most people would get all upset if they received this one brand new these days. It don't bother me a bit. It don't hurt nothing. I like it. But nevertheless, it is something that you have to notice that the older ones, like this one, did not have as good a fit and finish. Same thing with this Congress right here, in this red bone. You can feel the transitions. That pin looks kind of wacky. So does that bottom pin. Again, you can feel all the bolsters. You can run your finger and catch it on the outside of the brass liner, on the middle brass liner, and on the show side of the brass liner. There is a huge difference right there. That is way down in there. It's not level or smooth at all. Don't affect the knife at all. But it's how they were made back then. Another thing to note is stepping. Stepping is when you open a main blade. Does the back spring rise or lower, or does it stay even? Let me see if I can get this to focus here. That blade, that has a slight bit where the back spring is laying down in the handle, just a speck. It's riding just a little low on that particular blade. What about this blade? That blade, as you can see, if I can get that to focus there, that blade, that back spring is riding high on this particular blade. I can't really get that to focus. But nevertheless, my point being, you're going to see the same kind of stepping problems on these knives as you do the newer ones, where the back spring is riding a little high with the blade open or setting a little low with the blade open. I don't remember checking this particular one. It's pretty. It's, again, none of these would bother me. None of these would bother me when buying a knife. But this one is riding a little high. You can see it there. The back spring setting up above the blade. So it does have a little bit of stepping. Again, these things don't bother me, but I'm just noting that the older ones had the same kind of problems that the newer ones have. This Sodbuster looks pretty good. But it's just something you got to be aware of. It is the dangers of a traditional knife. There's a lot of work and there's a lot of variables, and they are not going to be perfect unless you pay enough money that they can spend a ridiculous amount of time on that knife making it. And then the last one, just to throw in for fun, would be how does the Tang stamp look? A lot of people are upset the case has moved to an etched Tang stamp instead of a stamped. This is one of the case's new etches. Case XX you can see on there. And that's what it looks like. Well, if we compare one of these, like, we'll do this, Congress here. If we're going to look at how the stamp looks, you can see that stamp is really not, in my opinion, it's not any easier to see than the newer etch. But if you look on the back, let me wipe the oil off that. Here we go. If you look on the back, 6488. This is a 64, an 88 pattern Congress. The 4 means it has 4 blades, and the 6 is referring to the bone handles. I'm having trouble getting that to see that. There we go. Notice you can't really see the second 8. If you get a magnifying glass and hold it just right, you can make out some of it. But when they stamped that in there, they didn't get it stamped in all the way. And so you're going to run into the same woes that I've noticed with these older knives that you run into with the newer ones. With the Tang stamp being kind of hard to see sometimes. So whether it's gaps, whether it's fit and finish, whether it's transitions, whether it's stepping on the back spring, whether it's blade centering, whether it's blade wobble, whether it's a Tang stamp etch, whatever it is, I've noticed that the new ones are not any worse at all than the older ones. I will say one exception. It seems to me that a lot of the older knives, more of them had strong springs than the newer knives. And I don't really know why. Not all of them did, but some of them tended to have a stronger spring. And I think that's because they were using carbon steel on the spring. Now, I don't know this. I might be wrong. But I think that's why they had a stronger spring. You can see the patina spots where this is a carbon steel of some sort. This Congress, you can see again the spots. This is a carbon steel. And I believe that's why that they generally had a stronger spring on them. But I don't know that. Again, none of these issues bother me. If there's a gap, it don't bother me because it don't affect the usability. If there's a rough transition or something and it bothers me, I can take my sandpaper, sand it down, buff it out, fix it if that really bothers me. Blade centering, I can correct that on a stainless knife. Blade wobble, I can fix that. Tang stamp etch, well, I may have to live with that one. But my point is that these things don't bother me on a new case knife. And these are certain things that have always been a plague of traditional style knives. These are things that people have always dealt with. It's not that the newer ones are worse made. It's just something you're going to have to deal with when you're getting this style of knife, a knife that's constructed in this manner. Y'all have a good day out there. I like all these knives, the newer ones, the older ones. But we can't get too particular. We've got to understand that if these little things bother us too much, then we'll just have to not buy them. But otherwise, if we're willing to look at it and understand that these are common problems and a common trait of having the knife that give it a unique characteristic, and we think it's worth the money we're going to pay, then we can pay for them and enjoy them. Everybody out there, y'all have a good day, and you keep your knives sharp. Comment down below how you feel about these little fit and finish problems with the older case knives and with the newer ones. Have a good day.